war is now. Now Ukrainian soldiers are dying. Now Ukrainian civilians are murdered. Ukrainian patriots in the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine are being tortured right now. Ukrainian women and children are being raped now. Right now, the Ukrainian land is being burned. At this very second, our cities and villages are being destroyed, our people are being murdered. Hello, this is Henry Keane speaking from Kiev, Ukraine, UATV English studio in a weekly attempt to bring the hardest of truth, probably, in easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine as usual. The war is now, but the way the full-scale reality affects some international organizations and somewhat is even remarkable, the Red Cross will be like this.
The International Committee of the Red Cross is working to find out the fate of 23,000 people whose families have not heard from them, either because they were captured or killed, or because contact was lost after, as they left their home. From a press release by the International Committee of the Red Cross.
Not that 23,000 of missing people is not a problem, sure it is. But then again, what do you do about it, Red Cross? Acting Olenivka style again?
We planned this visit together with the International Committee of the Red Cross in order to encourage it to obtain access from Russia to the Olenivka POW camp and visit Ukrainian prisoners of war. It appeared to be more difficult for the ICRC than repeating its appeals to both sides on its website. Despite our call and readiness to ensure such a trip, we did not see the ICRC. Dmytro Lubinets, Ukrainian Parliament Commissioner for Human Rights.
Well, I understand that the Red Cross is not about crossing red lines, and the guys simply keep addressing both sides, the perpetrators of the crime and the victims. What a know-how, huh? But this time, it's just not working. Good and evil are unmasked fully these days, and all of us have to choose at some point. It is a relief of sorts, if you will. At least one can find out what one is made of. So I guess the Red Cross should be way better off addressing not sides of the crime, but actually the humanitarian catastrophic issues directly. And also, it could do itself a favor and stop calling this war Russia-Ukraine international armed conflict as they do now. This is no conflict. This is the armed criminal aggression of Russia against Ukraine. And it is exactly because of this Russian criminal aggression against Ukraine, 23,000 people are missing and counting, just by the way. In times of this brutal reality, after 2 years of devastating war against the global security, moral and legal fulcrums, that of sovereignty and territorial integrity of our state, Ukraine, voices are still heard that Russia wants peace, and it is Ukraine that somehow continues craving more havoc and destruction on its own land. And sometimes someone who for sure is not Ukrainian, whose family has not been murdered by Russians, whose children have not been abducted and sent to Russia, so this someone might indeed ask himself from time to time, why don't Ukraine stop fighting already and just wouldn't give up on its land and people for the sake of not losing even more land and even more people? Oh, come on already, Ukraine. Pax vobiscus, why not to curb with losses and end this small war for the sake of big global peace? I mean, that clearly seems to be an obvious logic for some. For those who have not lost anything during this war, yet articulating their Philistine opinions with such a brazen disregard to all those who have. I could have provided them with an answer to their question, but they won't believe me. And I can clearly see why. I mean, I'm here in Ukraine right now, and this is state Ukrainian television after all, right? So to them, I am kind of prepaid talking Ukrainian head and can't be trusted. All right, fair enough. Don't listen to me, don't trust me. Listen to him. Russia will always fight against Ukraine. There will always be a reason to attack in 10 or 50 years, said Dmitry Medvedev. To refresh your cache memory, this is the same Soviet leftover Russian who on January 12th, during the visit of British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to Kiev, threatened to declare war on Britain. The same Russian who in December 2023 said that the threat of Russia's war with NATO and the Third World was and is, I quote him, never been so real. The same very Russian who earlier threatened to shell Germany. Well, any questions, dear peace lovers, now? Any hope to appease that eternally Soviet bloody monstrosity of Russia to a level when it for some reason just would lay down heavy and want no more blood? If so, then your naivety level is criminal, as it will not only fail you, but, in case you're not a regular Philistine peace talker, but a politician, your criminal naivety will fail your nation. Russia will never stop unless stopped, whether you like it or not. Whatever you think of that, however you wish for it not to be the case, this is exactly the case. Russia will lie, murder, rape, steal, burn, break all the laws and morals, then ask for negotiations and do it with you all over again while sitting at that very negotiations table. We in Ukraine have been through that at least since 2014 when Crimea was annexed, so we know. But please, you're welcome not to trust us Ukrainians on that. Trust Dmitry Medvedev. He's Russian after all, he knows exactly what he is. You might say, oh come on Henry, who cares what that idiot Medvedev says? Again, fair enough, he Medvedev really is an idiot and indeed a walking trash talker, but this is exactly what it takes to rule Russia, you see? Rubbish. Absolute, impregnable lies. Lies so incredible at a scale that it is more comfortable to believe it than refute. When your ex-president threatens to bomb Germany, it is easier for the nation to forget how come they are somehow driving German cars almost a century after what Russians call a great victory over Germany. And that Germany today is sending Taurus missiles and Leopard tanks to Ukraine to fight Russian version of fascism. When Medvedev threatens a war on England, it is easier for pauper Russians to forget that Russian oligarchs own half a Piccadilly and invested billions into most exclusive British real estate, all these ancient medieval palaces and shires owned by Putin's oligarch friends, remember? How, as Russian, you would mentally cope with the fact that as soon as you drive only 50 kilometers away from Moscow, you indeed end up in an ancient medieval environment, poverty, drunkenness, illnesses, and absolute devastation? The answer is greatness. Russians absolutely love that ephemeral idea of Russian greatness, as it helps them to cope with their own shortcomings with eyes wide shut. And if Ukraine does not somehow want to live in that great Russian poverty, great Russian oppression, great Russian destruction, and calls it what it really is, great Russian lies, well then the war for the sake of Russian greatness is the Russian answer. You see, the thing is, Russians are craving war. Russians as a nation, not only Putin, the people I mean. War explains it all for them. It explains to Russians why 15 million Russians live under the extreme poverty line. The war helps Russians to believe that it is not because they are destructive barbarians, but because of Ukraine somehow did it to them. Absurd and rubbish, you say? Exactly my point. But really, you would have become belligerent Russian too if you would listen to Russian TV propaganda for a while. You would all of a sudden understand that this war is not a crime but a necessity somehow and has to be carried on for the sake of great Russia, for the sake of great Russian values, for the sake of eternal imaginary greatness of the Russian folk. Imaginary because I see no greatness in the deeds of a nation that allows one freaky KGB officer to usurp power and rule the country for a quarter of the century, amending the constitution as it is a menu in a restaurant to his own taste and murdering his political opponents, fouling the reputation of the everything Russian, including culture and reputation around the globe. And not only these intangible assets Russia lost in Ukraine. Russia lost 7,000 tanks, 12.4 thousand armored vehicles, 10,000 artillery systems, 340 aircrafts, 320 choppers, ships and warships 25 downed, and as a cherry on the top, 1 submarine. And also, do not forget 400,000 of Russians have been lost by Russians in Ukraine. Also, 25 out of 78 Dagger-type missiles were downed. 406 down out of fired 843 caliber type missiles, 1,176 down out of 1,513 KH type missiles fired. Almost 1,000 ballistic Iskander missiles were fired at us in Ukraine. As per Yuri Ignat, spokesperson for Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, Russia has fired at us in Ukraine in total nearly 8,000 missiles. The cost of one Dagger missile can reach up to $10 million, roughly. The launch using aviation costs in general $60 million. Well, let's have it as a $50 million, if you will, per one launch. Do the math, so as to imagine how much money the Kremlin really spent on shelling us in Ukraine instead of building schools, roads, hospitals, and all that they badly need in Russia. But their propaganda did the dirty trick. They have switched and tossed the reality layers, you see. Instead of those roads, schools, and hospitals, Russians now have only Russian greatness. That craves blood. You now will be looking at the central temple of the Russian armed forces. Am I the only one who clearly sees a screenshot from Diablo gameplay here? So what's so great about it? What was so great about Bucha, Navalny's murder, 20,000 kidnapped Ukrainian children or 400,000 dead Russians? And here, I just saw no spiritual temple, but blood and violence, and see darkness. I see decorated it with the symbols Z and V that are not even Russian alphabet, by the way. I'll tell you one thing that is great in terms of Russia. Not sure it is great in terms of being any righteous or good, but it certainly is great in terms of size. It has been a great revelation for me, for sure. Well, here it is. Great Russians love their great motherland a great deal less than hate Ukraine. And it is never love, but solely out of this great hate that Russia always acts. Now it is time for more on UATV English. You ask hard questions, we answer in easy terms. The question of the week has been voiced by our dear viewer Alan Miller, 4205, and that question sounded like, watch out as Poland and the Baltic states are next. In easy terms, yes, they are next. I know it was a kind of circumcised explanation, so let me please explain it to you in detail. You see, it does not matter. Seriously. Whatever Putin says, it does not matter. It does not matter if Putin says he won't invade and then actually invades, of course, the Baltic and Poland. Again, it does not matter if Putin will attack. What matters is that he can. And it is exactly that option that should trigger only possible reaction from the world, absolute readiness to strike back. So no matter if the dog bites or not, we should be ready for it to bite. In terms of Russia, the world should take the worst possible scenario as the only manual instruction. Remember that choir of experts laughing at each other saying, Putin will never invade Ukraine, it will never happen, ha, ha, ha. Well, here we are, right? 2 years. So here is a hard truth in easy terms for you, dear Mr. Miller. If back then the world would be ready, there will be no war today. Well, that seems to be it for tonight and for the week, actually. It was me, Henry Keane, in UATV English, breaking the hard truth to easy terms for the whole free world directly from Ukraine as usual. We like you, and we hope that feeling is at least somewhat mutual. Like us in return, subscribe and share. Help us to promote Ukrainian voice worldwide. Please also do not hesitate to express your own opinion in the comments below. It matters a lot to us. Ask us a question, by the way, so next week we could do our best to answer it. Stay safe and tune in for more right already next week. Tomorrow with my dear colleague Paul Stelmach. Goodbye.